tonight's speaker, Philip Andrew Gibbs, who is Professor Emeritus of History at Middle Georgia State University. Although a native Virginian, he has lived and taught in Georgia as well as the United Kingdom since 1987. And apart from his current book, Sex, Liquor, and Lawlessness in Early Roanoke, he is also the author of Murder and Mountain Justice in the Moonshine Capital of the World, and Wicked Macon, Sinners and Saints in the Heart of Georgia. His forthcoming book, One Deadly Time in the Old Dominion, The Murder Investigations of the Baldwin-Felts Detective Agency, that sounds really good, will be released this fall. An avid tennis player, cyclist, and traveler, he also works as a professional musician, performing regularly throughout the Southeast with the Georgia Chryslers, a rock, pop, and R&B band. And he wants us to know he lives in Perry, Georgia. You're going to have to clarify where that is.
I will.
Georgia's a big state, and I'm not that well versed, but I am so excited. Please help me welcome Mr. Philip Andrew Gibbs.
Thank you. Yeah, Perry, Georgia is about 30 minutes south of Macon, Georgia. Macon, of course, is smack dab in the middle of the state.
Okay.
And I will make one correction. This book that's coming in the fall, that was originally titled One Deadly Time in the Old Dominion. Well, my publisher and I, well, at least my editor and I, we've kind of gone back and forth on the title. So now it is Law and Order for Hire in Virginia. And of course it deals with the Baldwin-Felts Detective Agency that was headquartered here in Roanoke, as well as in Bluefield. And in fact, I'll be talking a bit about the Baldwin-Felts Detective Agency as it relates to Roanoke and this, this theme of sex, liquor, and lawlessness in early Roanoke. But again, thank y'all so much for being here. It's so good, it's so wonderful to hear that so many people are interested in sex, liquor, and lawlessness. It's very gratifying, kind of warms my heart. But let me give you the theme of this book, or the thesis of the book, and then we'll give some illustrations to support the thesis of the book. And then I don't really want to lecture. I really want to make sure that I give everyone an opportunity to ask questions, so please feel free to interrupt me at any time, okay? But anyway, the theme of the book, or the thesis of the book, is that Roanoke in the 1880s and early 1900s was a Wild West town. During that same time, of course, you're probably familiar with Deadwood, South Dakota, or maybe Abilene, or Wichita, Kansas, or maybe Tombstone, Arizona, or Dodge City. And when you think of those cities or those towns, you think of a lot of lawlessness. They grew up overnight, either connected to gold or silver mining or cattle ranching, because in towns like, let's say, Dodge City or Wichita, you had cattle being driven, maybe 1,000 or more miles to these towns, and they were railheads, and of course the cattle were loaded onto the freight cars and shipped to Chicago. But there was a lot of money to be made there. Like these other towns that were connected, as I said, with copper, actually copper and silver and gold mining. But Roanoke, well, you all know this story. You know how Roanoke came about. It was Big Lick, you had tobacco warehouses in Big Lick, you had a little rail line too, but it's with the coming of N&W that Roanoke develops overnight. And of course, N&W, as you know, serviced the coal fields of West Virginia, extreme Southwest Virginia, and Eastern Kentucky, and provided, again, cheap, or rather, access for these coal companies to transportation. And of course, coal was going to Pittsburgh and other cities, but Pittsburgh was the steel capital of the United States during that period. Now, Roanoke comes to be known as the Magic City. And you know why? Because just in a few short years, it becomes this bustling municipality. And you have merchants coming here, you have ancillary industries, that is, those that are connected with N&W, iron manufacturing, you have the Virginia Brewing Company, you have all kinds of banks, you have those engaged in land speculation, you have grocers, you have lots and lots of folks who realize there's money to be made in Roanoke. In the same way you had that happen in these other cities that develop overnight. People are just flocking. By the way, before I go any further, can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I want to make sure that I don't like to use a microphone, even though I am a professional musician. I'm not a singer, I'm a bass player. But anyway, just let me know if I'm not, if you can't hear me. Anyway, so with these folks that I just mentioned, all these merchants and bankers and other industries or other companies, you're going to have the prostitutes. You're going to have professional gamblers. You're going to have saloon keepers. And so overnight, you've got a city that the so-called respectable people so very much want to be just that, respectable. You know, to be a center of culture and moral righteousness and all that. But the problem was, you had this underworld. And the underworld that I'm speaking of was particularly along Railroad Avenue, and also in an area known as Pot Liquor Flats. I'm not sure if you ever heard of that. I can't figure it out for the life of me exactly where that was. But also High Street and Ernest Avenue. High Street, Ernest Avenue, Railroad Avenue, those sections ultimately become the red light district in Roanoke. And it was something that was actually protected by the mayor and the city council, much to the chagrin of the ministers and all the quote-unquote respectable people. Generally, there was this thinking that if we don't have a red light district, then what's going to happen? They're going to scatter throughout the city, all the prostitutes. And we don't want that, so the best thing to do is have a red light district. Now, they would never go so far as to legalize prostitution. That rarely ever happened in the United States during that period. But you did have red light districts that, as I said, were protected. So police officers were told, yeah, that you can go down and patrol the district, but do not harass the women. All right? Make sure that they're in their houses about 8 o'clock. Make sure they're not wandering around the streets, but don't harass them. And you might argue that businessmen were supportive of the red light district. And you might ask yourself, why would they be supportive of the red light district? Well, maybe it's obvious that the madams bought carpet, they bought furniture, they bought groceries, they bought clothing, all that, you know, from the merchants. And then also the houses, you know, were owned by businessmen in the city, and they can make more money renting their houses to madams than they could to the middle class and even the upper class families. So it was also protected by the business interests in the city. Now, the business interests in the city, however, were not supportive of the free-range cattle in Roanoke. I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but maybe you are, particularly if you read Rand Dotson's book, The Magic City. But it's a study of Roanoke between roughly the 1880s up to around 1912. And you had in Roanoke cows roaming here, there, and everywhere. So they want a city that's going to be clean. They want a city that's going to be respectable. Yet you got cows here, there, and everywhere, and they're dropping their manure. And of course you had horses that dropped their manure, but these cows are roaming everywhere. And they're causing a lot of congestion on the streets. And I know for a fact that I spent some time studying in India, you know, in places like Mumbai or New Delhi, you know, cows are just roaming around and just plop down in the middle of the road. And so you have to go around them. And this is the kind of thing you had in Roanoke. And so ultimately, the businessmen and the city council decided we got to do something about it. But they were afraid they might alienate, you know, the people who were pro-cow. Because you had folks who, again, you got to remember, you have a large laboring class of folks who have come to Roanoke from all over the world, not just the surrounding mountains. They've come from the Northeast. They've come from, for example, those who are coming from Ireland, or those who are coming from Austria, or what was at that time Austria-Hungary, or they're coming from Greece. They're coming from Syria. I mean, you have a cross-section of people. It's a very multi-ethnic city, which is the same kind of thing you had in a lot of wild western towns, right? Because there's money here, and so they're coming in. But a lot of poor folks needed a milk cow, you know, and so they had these cows. And again, they're roaming around the city, and much to the nuisance of a lot of folks. And so, again, back to the city council, they didn't want to take a stand on this, so they submitted it to the voters. And the voters said, no, we are pro-cow, and they won by one vote. Which really irritated the city council, because they knew that the business interests and others wanted to do something about this. So eventually, NNW said that it would put $150,000 into building a new depot if you'll do something about the cows. So eventually they do something about it. So the period of free-range cattle in Roanoke ended around 1905. Okay. But having said that, you also had the chicken problem. Now these are some silly anecdotes I'm going to offer up here, but you know, I was doing research on this book. I went to the city council minutes. I went through all the city council minutes and looked at the city code. Of course, I searched all the newspapers, and if you have read the book, or if you do read the book, you'll find that I document everything. I mean, I was trained as a historian, and everything has to be documented. I don't want anybody to think that I'm making something up. Although the stories seem like I've made them up, because you know, the truth can be stranger than fiction, as you well know. But I was reading the city council minutes, and I came across a petition that some of the more respectable ladies had submitted to the mayor, again the city council, and said that these chickens are eating our flowers, you know, they're really messing in our garden, and they said that they are ruining our dispositions and putting murder in our hearts. And they asked the mayor if they could poison them. The mayor said, nah, it's not a good idea. But they would do something. They would try to do something about it. But what you have in Roanoke during these early years is, too, the liquor issue. You could not throw a rock in Roanoke without hitting the saloon. They're everywhere. And the saloons often, too, would have rooms for prostitutes. There's a picture, actually, I got from the Western Historical Society, right? Of the Capitol Saloon on Salem Avenue. Have y'all seen that picture? Yeah. it's a picture of the interior of the saloon and the bar, and the bartenders are behind, you know, the bar, and there's a sign behind the bar, and it says "Oysters upstairs." Yeah, oysters. That was a word used, you know, for prostitutes. Okay, so you had prostitutes upstairs. But again, thank y'all for that picture. I got it in the book. But anyway, that was an issue, the liquor. And we're going to talk more about that a little bit later, particularly after Virginia goes dry in 1916 and the nation goes dry by 1918, 1919 with the passage of the 18th Amendment. Gambling, that was another issue in the city. Professional gamblers flocked into Roanoke, and they were running, they would find hotels, office buildings that might have space where they could actually have faro tables, poker tables, and also roulette wheels. And this was really of great concern to a lot of women in the city whose husbands were frequenting these, you know, these gambling halls, these gambling rooms. And there were women, for example, that would they appealed to the mayor. The mayor wouldn't do anything about it. And they decided to take it upon themselves to invade these and turn over the tables and drag their husbands out. Yes. I mean, there was one woman, she and her husband had a barber shop, and he was taking all the money from the barber shop and going to the roulette wheel, and lost all their money. So this is the kind of thing that's going on. And of course, with gambling, you had violent confrontations too. I do detail in the book, you know, where you have these confrontations between gamblers and someone gets killed. Just like you had, you know, I don't want to draw too close a parallel between what's happening here in the Wild West, but it seems to fit, you know, where you had somebody that a gambler thought was cheating, or someone thought was cheating, and so guns come out. But you have this lawlessness in Roanoke, and you got to understand, during this period, there was no state police, and you had no Bureau of Criminal Investigation, and law enforcement in the city was somewhat lax, because most of the people, and I dare say most who went into law enforcement did not think about this as a career. It was something you did for a while. You get a little money, and you go into some kind of business or buy some land or what have you. Some of them did it part-time, but the police department in Roanoke was understaffed. No one was really well trained. They were ill-equipped, and so this was a real problem because you needed a really skilled force of people to investigate, to solve a lot of murders and a lot of other crimes in the city. And this is why they turned to the Baldwin-Felts Detective Agency. Okay? The Baldwin-Felts Detective Agency started out in the 1880s and 1890s as really Baldwin's railroad detectives. William Gibney Baldwin from Tazewell, Virginia, and later Thomas L. Phelps from Galax, Virginia. They came together by 1900 and opened up Baldwin-Felts. But in early years, it was always involved in protecting railroad property and patrolling the passenger trains, because you had a real problem with pickpocketing, violent crime on the trains. But by the early 1900s, there is a real need for some type of detectives who can go out there and investigate and solve crimes. And in this book that I have coming out in the fall, it's all about that. I mean, the agency, for example, was so dogged in its pursuit of criminals that, well, let's say you have a murder. There was one case of a Syrian by the name of Mose Ferris who shot another Syrian, and then he fled the city. Well, the Baldwin Phelps Detective Agency said, we're going to find him, because their reputation was on the line here. They traveled all the way, their agents traveled all the way to South America to bring him to justice. And this was not long before March of 1912, Carroll County. Are y'all familiar with what happened? Okay, what happened? The shootout, yeah. March 1912.
Been to the reenactment.
You've been to reenactment, okay. You've all been to reenactment. Well, maybe I should defer to y'all. Well, you know the story here. Floyd Allen, who was sort of the patriarch of the Allen clan.
I know they didn't find any gold when they redid the house.
Yeah, I suppose it was gold buried, yeah. In Sydney, or Sidna. I'm not sure whether it's Sydney or... I know, and I've had people say, no, it's not Sydney, it's Sydney. No, it's Sydney. But anyway, Floyd Allen, patriarch of the Allen clan. And of course, you already know the Allens were a law unto themselves in Carroll County. They were not impoverished mountaineers. They were very prosperous landowners, farmers, merchants. But they were not going to submit to authority of any kind. And I don't think I'm exaggerating there at all. Yeah, Floyd Allen was brought to trial for interfering with the transport of prisoners. Two members of his family, actually two of his nephews, they got into a little trouble. It was a minor scrape. And they fled to North Carolina, over close to Mount Airy, because you know it's right over the mountain. And so Deputy Sheriff from Carroll County went down there to bring them back. And he does. And he handcuffs them, and then he ties them to the wagon. And they, as they're heading toward Hillsville, they pass by Floyd Allen's house around Fancy Gap. Because that was, Fancy Gap was the place that they, they owned a lot of land over there, had houses over there. So when Floyd saw this, he was enraged. No one treats members of my family this way. And it's not surprising because, in the book, Murder About Justice, I wrote, and of course many other books, the Allens were descendants of the Scots-Irish who settled much of the Blue Ridge. My family, and maybe many of your families, came from Northern Ireland, or came from the lowlands of Scotland, as well as Northern England. But they had very pronounced notions of personal honor and family honor, and they were not going to tolerate any kind of disrespect. And so Floyd intervenes, just beats the hell out of the deputy sheriff, releases his nephews. He's not arrested. I mean, they were afraid to arrest him. I mean, they were afraid of, but they do ultimately indict him, and he is brought to trial in 1912, March of 1912, and he's tried and he is convicted, and he's sentenced to a year in the state penitentiary in Richmond. And you probably know the story from here on. He stands up and he says, "Gentlemen, I just ain't a-going." And this is when the guns came out. Thornton Massey, the judge, he was killed. The sheriff was killed. Commonwealth's attorney, W.N. Foster, was killed. A member of the jury was killed. And there was also an innocent bystander who happened to be killed, a lady. No one had ever seen anything quite like this. I don't think there has been anything similar, even today. I can't think of an episode like this. Everyone was shocked. Well, the governor of the state, Hodges Mann, sent a telegram to the Baldwin Fells Detective Agency. And it says, judge killed, Commonwealth's attorney killed, sheriff killed, spared no expense, get to Hillsville. Again, no state police, you're calling on the Baldwin Fells Detective Agents. They go down there and they start hunting for the Allens who fled into the mountains. Floyd himself was injured during the shooting, and he was taken to jail. Of course, he tried to commit suicide. Someone slipped him a knife, and he tried to slit his throat. He was not going to go to jail. No way. But he didn't succeed. But the Baldwin Fells agents are successful in rounding them up. Of course, before they went to those mountains looking for the Allens, they wanted to make sure they were heavily armed. They knew the Allens would probably have shotguns and they had Winchesters. W.G. Baldwin appeals to the governor to authorize the agents, his detectives, to get brand spanking new Army Springfield rifles from the Armory. So they're shipped down to Hillsville, and they take those into the mountains. I mean, they were heavily armed. And they succeed in bringing, but fortunately, there wasn't a lot of bloodshed. There wasn't any bloodshed, actually. They ultimately knew they were caught. They surrendered. But there were two that escaped the mountains, and they were Sidney Allen and Wesley Edwards. They were cousins. They go all the way to Des Moines, Iowa, and get jobs under assumed names. But the Baldwin Fells agents, being who they were, track them down. Luckily, they were able to use Wesley Edwards' girlfriend. She unwittingly led them to Wesley Edwards and, of course, Sidney Allen. They bring them back. And they bring, by the way, not only Sidney and Wesley to Roanoke, all the other Allens involved in the shooting are brought to Roanoke. Yeah. And the reason why was because it was believed that if you held them in Hillsville, the Allens, who were not in jail, were going to try to break them out. And so they decided Roanoke is the best place to keep them safe. And there are pictures, by the way, of them, in jail in Roanoke. Yeah. That's a little aside about, the Baldwin Fells agents and, again, the role they play in all of this. But before I go any further, do you have any questions about anything I've said so far? Yes.
Back to the cows and chickens.
Cows and chickens, yeah.
Were they owned by anybody?
Yes.
Oh, they were?
Oh, they were.
Oh.
Oh, they were owned by people.
Oh, but they
That's why there were so many people who were pro-cow. These are our cows.
Okay.
We need them for milk.
But they just didn't
And also,
allow
we don't want anybody telling us what to do with our
I
cows.
see. Okay.
Right.
Right.
Or our chickens.
Yeah. Okay. That was all. I just wanted to clear that up.
No, really. That they were owned by people. That was the issue.
Wow.
That was very much the issue.
Okay.
Yes.
With all the liquor and gambling prostitution, was there like an organized crime component like the Chicago Boys or something?
Yeah, let's go to the 1920s. In 1916, Virginia goes dry. Okay. Then by 1918, we had the passage of the 18th Amendment, and of course the passage of the Volstead Act, which gave the federal government the authority to enforce prohibition. And what happens, not surprisingly, given Roanoke's proximity to all the liquor-producing counties in the mountains, especially Franklin, yeah, Bonnie is, yeah, I'm from Franklin County. And we all know Franklin County, moonshine capital of the world, probably justly deserves that name. That liquor is flowing right into Roanoke. And just as you said, or asked, you had a liquor syndicate. It was run by John B. Carter. And, let's see, he lived on, I think it was Casper Hill. I'm not sure if that's even exists any longer, but he had a syndicate that he protected, even if that meant using violence. John B. Carter, for example, burned the house or houses of police officers. You see, there was a group known as the Corn Squad. And Corn Squad, they're going after the corn liquor producers. And the head of the Corn Squad was W.N. Newton. And he was pretty aggressive. So were the other members of the Corn Squad. And this is kind of controversial, but there was a law that said that you would get extra pay if you popped someone who was drunk, or you popped somebody who actually was running liquor. You got a little more money for that. And then if you caught somebody had to steal, even more money. There was incentive to go after. In fact, even the ministers and the people who were pro-prohibition said, you know what? You're spending more time doing this and actually investigating murders and robberies, because there was money to be made. Well, John B. Carter, he goes after Newton and others. He not only burned houses, but the Corn Squad, often seized cars run by, some of the moonshiners. Some of those people who were running liquor for John B. Carter. And they were actually cars that were pretty high-powered, for that day and age. We're talking about the mid to late 1920s. And he ordered them to be dynamited. There'd be cars sitting in a garage downtown, and he had them dynamited. Destroying the entire garage, destroying all the other cars. This happened several occasions. I mean, it was vicious. It really was vicious. There were planes that were blown up, strangely enough, that they were thought to have been involved in surveillance, of liquor operations. Again, we get in here to about the late 1920s. John B. Carter ultimately goes to jail. But when he gets out, he continues after 1928. But he has a massive heart attack, and that's it for John B. Carter. But the liquor would continue to flow. And interesting enough, women would be some of the main persons involved in the liquor traffic in Roanoke. Which is ironic, too, because women were the ones who were very much involved in the crusade against liquor. The Women's Christian Temperance Union goes back to the 1830s and 1840s. And then you had the Prohibition movement in the late 19th century, led by women, led by ministers, and business interests that were concerned about their workers getting drunk and not showing up for their jobs. And that was a problem. And, so you have women at the forefront of that crusade, but then when you get to the 1920s, you have women very much involved in it. There are women that I know over in Bartow County that were popped for making liquor. They were running stills. There were women that were running liquor. They were, they actually had a great ruse, because as women, and they dressed, in very fine fashion, and they looked like very respectable women, and when they'd make their runs, to a particular venue, it was just thought that they were making a social call. But when they were actually doing it, they, were negotiating with people, making the liquor deals, and actually running the liquor. One of the most famous women involved in liquor trafficking in Roanoke was Willie Carter Sharp. Have you all heard of her?
I read that.
You read my... Okay, I know B's familiar with Willie Carter Sharp. She was from Floyd County originally, and she married someone by the name of Sharp. That didn't last very long. Married someone named Carter, actually connected with the John B. Carter family. She was a farm girl, again from Floyd County, and she was drawn to the excitement, of running liquor. She was drawn to Roanoke. Roanoke was, again, a wild town. And so she starts running liquor, and she becomes known as a very skilled, very adept driver. Okay? She knew how to negotiate those mountains in Floyd and Franklin County. And so she was running liquor from those mountains down what you know today as 220. At that time in the 20s, it was largely known as the Rocky Mount Roanoke Road, which historically also was the Great Wagon Road, part of the Great Wagon Road. That's the road that so many Scots-Irish came down, as well as Germans, into the region. But she, was known as a very skilled driver. She not only ran liquor, but she piloted liquor cars. There were liquor caravans, okay? You needed somebody to guide them through the mountains, and that's what she did. And she made money. She dressed very fashionably. She actually had diamonds implanted in her front teeth. Yeah. She gets arrested for running liquor in the late 1920s, and she is sent to the Federal Women's Penitentiary in West Virginia. When she gets out, she continues running liquor. But by the early 1930s, the federal government had succeeded in putting together a case against the liquor runners in Franklin County. You know this story, don't you, Bonnie? You have, for example, you have the Commonwealth's attorney, C. Carter Lee, who's indicted along with deputies and other moonshiners and runners of liquor for conspiracy, that the authorities were allowing folks to run their liquor. They could make their liquor, run their liquor, as long as they paid what was called the granny fee. If you paid that fee, then you could run your liquor. Now, I imagine many of you have seen the movie Lawless, or you read the novel by Matt Bondurant, which is about his uncles or great-uncles, Forrest and Jack Bondurant. Yeah. Bondurant boys were actually from around Snow Creek. They weren't really mountain boys. And their daddy was a county commissioner. So they weren't, impoverished hillbillies, as it's kind of portrayed in the movie and also in Matt Bondurant's novel. But they were running a lot of liquor, and they paid the granny fee. And they testified in 1935 in what was called the Great Moonshine Conspiracy Trial that was held in Harrisonburg, Virginia. Willie Carter Sharp was called to testify, and she testified, yes, we all paid the granny fee. Now, there were people like Jeff Richards, who was a deputy sheriff in Franklin County, who knew he was going to probably go to prison, but he decided he was not going to go alone, and he was going to make a deal with the federal government. Of course, he made it clear, I think, to some people that he probably was not long for this world. He was going to turn state's evidence. And C. Carter Lee sent Jeff Richards on a mission to bring in a black man who had stolen some clothes from a store in Callaway. And Jeff Richards just did not understand, why do I have to do this? Why tonight? But C. Carter Lee insisted. And so he goes and he makes the trek to Callaway, but he usually had a partner. And his partner, interesting enough, got sick that night. So Jeff goes to Callaway gets the prisoner, a fellow by the name of Smith, heads down the Callaway Road near Antioch Church, and ambushed. He's blown away, so is the prisoner. It really never was solved, although there were two West Virginia boys by the name of Dooling that were accused, and they were sent to prison for it, but it turned out later on someone confessed to it. A fellow he actually committed suicide, but before he did that, he left a note that he had done that along with someone else. They had been paid. Never revealed who paid them. But in case of C. Carter Lee, he was acquitted. There was one holdout on the jury. They took vote after vote after vote. He refused to budge. I mean, again, I would venture that someone got to him, that he was paid off. So C. Carter Lee was able to escape prison. But there were other moonshiners who spent some time in jail. Willie Carter Sharp did not go to jail for that. She basically disappears from the scene, goes to St. Louis, Missouri for a while. After that, not sure what happens to her. But I love to tell this story because when I was writing the book Murder and Moonshine Justice, I found out that there is a bar, an American-style bar in Montpellier, France, on the French Riviera. And the name of the bar is the Willie Carter Sharp Bar. And there's a likeness of Willie Carter Sharp.
Oh my goodness.
Now how in the hell did that happen? How did that happen? Someone suggested to me that it was possible that there were servicemen, who were familiar with Willie Carter Sharp. Maybe after the war, after World War II, I don't know. Did she make her way to France? I'm not sure. But look it up, the Willie Carter Sharp Bar. Okay, any other questions right now before I go? Yes, ma'am.
The Baldwin Phelps, you mentioned Bluefield, but you mean Bluefield, West Virginia, right?
Yes.
That's where they were.
Yeah, the Baldwin Phelps Detective Agency, its operations in Virginia largely were in service to the governor and local authorities in the investigation and solving of murders and other violent crimes or robberies. In fact, in this forthcoming book, it really focuses on the murders that they were involved in solving. But in West Virginia, the Baldwin Phelps Agency was very much involved in strike breaking. As you know that by 1920, 1921, the United Mine Workers was trying to organize the southern coal fields, and there was a lot of resistance. And the Baldwin Phelps agents were called in they did a lot of spying. They would pose, for example, as UMW, organizers or members. And of course, they too were charged with removing families from their homes that were involved in striking, because as you already know, I'm sure, that if you worked for the coal companies, you lived in company houses. If you were thought to be involved in union activity, they would remove you.
So there they worked primarily for the railroad.
They were working for both the railroads, but particularly for the coal companies. And you had some bloody battles. One of the most... Mayborn Massacre occurs in 1920 in Mingo County. Yeah, there you have, described earlier, an attempt to organize the coal fields in Mingo County and surrounding counties, and there was a lot of resistance to this. Baldwin Phelps agents were called in, and they were set to remove some of the families from their homes, and they get involved in a confrontation with Sid Hatfield. Sid Hatfield was the constable in Mayborn, and he was pro-union. And he and some miners get into this confrontation with the Baldwin Phelps agents. 7 Baldwin Phelps agents were slaughtered. I mean, it was awful. They came out on the losing end in this battle. No one was charged. Well, they were charged, but they were acquitted of the killing. Later on, Sid Hatfield, it's 1921, he goes to McDowell County to testify in an unrelated case. He and his deputy head up the steps of that courthouse, and there at the top, waiting for them, Baldwin Phelps agents. And they claimed that Sid, by the way, connected to the Hatfields code, yeah, they claimed that Sid went for his gun. And they pulled out their guns and they shot him to pieces along with his deputy. They were never convicted of that because they argued it was self-defense. And you might make an argument that there was probably a good chance that Sid Hatfield was going to go for his gun because once he saw him, he knew what was happening, what was about to happen, because he was quick to draw his gun and fire. He was known for that, you know. But, yeah, that was the May 1 massacre. And after that, things got even uglier. You probably heard of the battle for Blair Mountain. Yeah, thousands of miners. You know, largely, it was the impetus for this march was the killing of Sid Hatfield, who was pro-union. And they march through these counties. And in their way is Blair Mountain. So you have Baldwin, well, actually it's not the Baldwin Phelps agents. You have the militia and others called out. They have machine guns. I mean, it's a war. Unbelievable. The miners are on the losing end of it. So, yeah, when you get to the late 20s, things settle down. Miners get, you know, they're on the losing side of this whole thing. But in terms of Roanoke and Virginia, well, let me say this. In West Virginia, Baldwin Phelps agents were often seen, and to many old folks, you know, who remember those days, seen as gun-toting thugs. Not, you know, not as these heroes as you had in Virginia, because in Virginia they weren't involved in that kind of activity. Yeah, they were involved in protecting railroad property, but they became well known for their investigations and for their dogged persistence in bringing in lawbreakers and solving, as I said, some of the most heinous crimes in the state's history. Okay, any other questions?
I'm curious about, I haven't read your book yet, but do you do any discussion of Mayor McCutcheon and
Yes, let's
his
talk
lady
about
friend?
let's talk about Mayor McCutcheon. Cutcheon, rather. Yeah, thank you. You probably already know the story. That's why you're asking the question.
Well, it ties in with the title, you know, with the.
Oh, sex, liquor, and lawlessness. Yeah, I mean, my God. Joel Cutcheon was the mayor during the teens. He was, by all accounts, a good mayor. He was very much an advocate of public education, expanding the schools because the schools were overcrowded. He wanted to do something about the roads in the city, sewage, all kinds of other problems. He was a great proponent of a public library, but he also was a great proponent of a red light district. I mean, he made no bones about it. He said to the ministers and others who were clamoring for him to do something about it, no, we're not, because you know what? They're going to scatter to all the neighborhoods if we don't have a red light district. And so that ultimately gets him in trouble. I mean, the red light district before 1912, 1911, had been up and running, and generally the mayors and the city council went along with it. But there's this movement in the early 1900s, a bit later, we got to clean up Roanoke. And this is the way to do it, or one step. And I think they were particularly emboldened by the efforts of evangelicals who came to the city, or evangelists, sorry. One evangelist who was well known in the South during that period was Sam Jones from Georgia. Sam Jones, he came to Roanoke, he held a long period of revivals and all that, and in all these revivals, he's condemning Roanoke as one of the most sinful cities he's ever seen. Talked about how Railroad Avenue, you had the saloons, you had knife fights, you had shootings, you had just prostitutes roaming around. Yeah, that this city is unlike any other city you'd ever seen. You believe that the city's, the mayor and the city council, they had no backbone. I mean, he actually used that word. They had no backbone. You give me a few days, I'll clean up this city. And he called on the ministers to do something. And so they do, along with some of the political enemies of Joel Cutchin. You had a political machine in Roanoke. Cutchin was sort of at the top of it. And there were others who had ambitions of supplanting him and his supporters. And they focused on the fact that Mayor Cutchin was taking bribes from the madams, okay? He was taking bribes from them. He was getting furniture, he was getting carpet, he was getting jewelry. No doubt he was getting sexual favors because he reported that women would go into his office, he'd lock the door, and they'd come out an hour later. And he particularly offended many people in the city when he allowed a black woman, okay, this is during the era of Jim Crow segregation. Her name was Maggie Ferguson, and she came to Roanoke from Detroit. And she asked Mayor Cutchin, could she open up a house of ill fame? That's what they called brothels, a house of ill fame. Sometimes called it a disorderly house, but a house of ill fame. But here's what's so fascinating, given the time. She wanted white women in her brothel. So here's a black woman during this period of Jim Crow segregation who is going to oversee these white women. That kind of stands things on its head, doesn't it, a bit, so she gets permission. And that really offended a lot of folks. But he was allowing, these women to run their brothels. The police officers were told not to harass them. If they did harass them, try to actually prosecute them for prostitution, they themselves might be dismissed, or they might be. Certainly we get a dressing down from the mayor. That happened. Because just to explain this, they never decriminalized, decriminalized prostitution. Prostitution still was illegal. It's just, we're still going to have a red light district, and we're going to turn our heads. Okay. The same thing happened in Storyville, in New Orleans. It happened in all the other cities, be it Richmond, Lynchburg, Bristol. Of course, what is interesting too, though, is that those cities closed down their red light districts about the time that Joel Cutchin was going to be prosecuted for taking bribes, prosecuted for malfeasance and misfeasance in office. And when they shut down those red light districts in those cities, guess where those women went? They flooded into Roanoke. And that was something really made the administration mad, and all the others. All these women now are in Roanoke. So you have this exploding population of prostitutes. So they go after Joel Cutchin, and he is convicted, and he is removed from office. But 2 years later, he wins election as judge magistrate. He had his friends, But this whole issue of prostitution, as write about in a chapter called The Shuttlecock. It just bounces back and forth. Mayors claiming we're going to do something about it, or we have done something about it, but others will say it's still here. No, it's not here. So this goes on and on and on and on. But then you also have the other issue of seduction and white slavery in Roanoke. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the white slavery paranoia of the early 1900s. There was this belief, and there's actual evidence to support this, that white girls were being kidnapped into prostitution, or kidnapped and then forced into prostitution. And so that was a real concern. There were a lot of books written about it. It led to the passage of the Mann Act. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Mann Act. Yeah, that's a federal crime to transport a woman across state lines for illicit purposes. That was all a result of the white slavery fear. How widespread was it? Still is debated by historians. Did it exist? Yeah, it did exist. But that gave to the creation of something called the Travelers' Aid Society, which operated in Roanoke. The Travelers' Aid Society was devoted to protecting young women who came into the city. They arrive at the depot, and someone could easily convince them that to go with them, that I've got a job for you, or I'll put you up, or what have you. And so you had women, older women, who patrolled the depots to try to protect these young girls and children. But Roanoke, again, it was attracting a lot of people. There were young girls from the mountains who came to Roanoke. Some of them ran away because they wanted to get a job in the city. Some of them did wind up on High Street or Ernest Avenue or in some of the brothels. Any other questions so far? Yes, sir.
Have you ever heard that there was a speakeasy in Hotel Roanoke in the basement? And
Yes.
tunnels
Yes, sir.
all through downtown Roanoke to get there?
Yeah, there was. Yeah, I heard that. I don't know exactly where these tunnels would be, but yeah, there was a speakeasy there, and there were speakeasies all over the city. They had various names. Sometimes they were called blind tigers or blind pigs. Have you ever heard that? Well, one way to disguise that you're running an illegal bar was to say that you could buy a ticket and that you could see a blind tiger inside. An exotic animal of some sort. And so you bought that ticket, you went in there, and that ticket you could exchange for, let's say, a glass of liquor. Yeah. So blind tigers, blind pigs, yeah, that was sort of a designation that they used as a way of disguising their operations.
But you don't know any more about the tunnels and the...
I don't know anymore. I wish I did. That's a great...
There's the tunnel under the railroad tracks on Jefferson Street.
Oh, there
It
is?
used to be on the south side, and went over to Hotel Roanoke. And it come up on the sidewalk, but there's a big metal plate sitting out
Yeah,
the
it
sidewalk.
was.
Now, where it went, I don't know, but we used to use it across the street, and I was working with
Oh, really?
the Hotel
Yeah,
Roanoke.
there was so much mischief and people got attacked and it got
They closed
dangerous.
it down.
It wasn't a hidden secret thing. Everybody knew about it.
Everyone knew about it?
About in the 80s, wasn't it? They closed about 1980s.
Yeah, somewhere in there.
It was in the 70s.
Yeah.
It took you, it's like I said,
It was
you
made,
don't want to do it at nighttime.
it was to cross, get under the
Yeah,
tracks.
cross the tracks. We didn't have it. The thing, I call it, we didn't have it.
Oh, okay. Someone else had a question?
Yeah, Will, could you comment on one of the infamous lynchings that occurred in Roanoke?
Oh, yeah. By the way, there's a connection to William Gibbony Baldwin. In 1893, you had the Roanoke riot. You've all heard of that? Maybe studied that? Yeah. There was a young lady by the name of, well, she came from, I think it was Botetourt County, over to sell grapes and some other produce in the Roanoke market. And there was a black man, later on learned his name was Smith, that he he told her that if she would accompany him to this lady's house, because he would help her sell these grapes, okay? And he doesn't lead her to the house, leads to the bottom of some abandoned building, and he demands money and threatens her, and but she gives him a little money, but then he hits her in the head a couple of times and flees, and well, she staggers back and had to, actually it was a saloon there near Market Square, and tells them what had happened. She didn't know exactly, she wasn't sure just who it was. I mean, she had trouble identifying him. William Gibbs Baldwin, actually, well, there was this man I'm describing, he was seen near some open boxcars on the railroad, and how they believed that he was responsible for this, I'm not quite clear, but William Gibbs Baldwin runs him down with his horse, puts him on the back of his horse, and takes him back to the saloon, and where this Sally Bishop is, and she says she wasn't sure if he was the man. His hat, similar to the hat that the man was wearing who assaulted her. Baldwin said, okay, we're not sure, but I'm going to take him to jail. But there was a crowd that gathered outside the saloon at the time. And Baldwin, was not going to surrender his prisoner. He draws his gun and walks out with the prisoner. And he says to them that he's not the man, but I'm taking him to jail anyway. Puts him on the back of his horse, rides to the jail. Well, by that time, you have a growing crowd that's convinced this is the man. And they surround the jail. And you have actually thousands, a lot of them are onlookers, but a lot of them are determined to seize him and lynch him. The mayor at the time was Henry Trout, and Trout was not going to allow that to happen. Now, we know that often they did not get fair trials. And there were those who did not commit murders who went to the gallows for assault. But still, he felt that if Roanoke is going to be known as, a law and order town, a civil town, it needed to make sure that justice, is done. And so he was not going to allow him to be taken. It calls out the militia. And the militia, a lot of these were very young men. They were called out, and the crowd grows. Eventually, they start shooting, and then the militiamen fire back and kill a number of members of the crowd. Yeah, it gets nasty. Trout himself is injured, shot in the foot. And the crowd really, they want blood. And they wanted Trout. Baldwin was able to get into Hotel Ponce de Leon. You're probably familiar with, get him there. But the crowd figured out where he was, and then they move him, they get him on a train to Lynchburg, and then from Lynchburg he goes to Richmond. He didn't want to go, but he felt like he had no other choice. People said, you've got to go because they're going to kill you. The chief of police and the chief sergeant, against Trout's instructions, decides to turn over Smith to the crowd. And he's lynched. And he's lynched down by the Roanoke River, I believe. And I don't know the location of that photo. Yeah. But he was burned.
Didn't they put the, I say plaque, but the roadside commemorative sign about that over near Franklin Road in the past couple of years?
Yes.
I thought that's what that lynching was mentioned in that sign. So I guess it'd be down towards, you say towards the river.
Yeah, towards the river.
Along Franklin Road.
Yeah.
Near,
But that riot, really was a black mark on Roanoke. it was an ugly, it was an ugly episode in the city's history, and the succeeding mayors were determined for that not to happen again, and it did, people were embarrassed by what happened, it was, but it doesn't happen. Now, that doesn't mean that there were black men who were accused of crimes, just mainly for assault or something else, and the trials are pretty, they're hurried, and they end up going to either hanged or electrocution. And about 1912, electrocution was a matter of 1912. No, actually, sorry, that 1908. Yeah, was a matter of execution. But yeah, that was an ugly, ugly, ugly time, and it just convinced so many people in the country. I'm not talking about just the state, the country, that Roanoke was a lawless town. But having said that, think about all the other towns in the South, and even in the Midwest where you had lynchings. Any other questions? Am I going on?
We got one more if you got a pressing question we haven't covered already.
Well, thank y'all so much for coming out. I do have books.
That was my question. How do they get their book from you?
Well, I've got them here, and yeah, they're $25 each. If you don't have cash, I have Venmo and Cash App. Yeah, if you'd like a book, I'll certainly sign it.